It's a pleasure to be here at USC Roski, is that how you say it? For the first time, and thank you all for coming out tonight through the rain and the floods and the presidential fundraiser that's going on and blocking up traffic, I think, in parts of town. I'm going to, we got the fire going, and present a compressed tour of my journey as a writer and designer, read and play some excerpts, and talk a little about my process, thinking, and evolution. I'll go for about 45 minutes, then we can open it up for questions, comments, and conversation. Let me take you back to the last century, 1975. I'm a painting and printmaking major at a city college in New York. On the side, I'm writing poetry and short stories. And at a certain point, letters and words started to migrate into my picture making. One day, I met with a painting teacher and showed him a secret stack of drawings that combined abstract marks, letter forms, and made-up words. This is one of those drawings. He looked through the stack, shook his head, wagged his finger in my face, and said, "Warren, you're barking up the wrong tree here. Never combine words and images. They exist in two different spheres of the brain. They're two different languages." I left his office feeling like I'd been given a mission in life, and I've been combining words and images or making images of words ever since, for better or worse. I went out and bought a typed specimen book and made a hand-lettered alphabet book titled Type Dreams. A balancing act. Trapped are balls. I didn't even know the names of the anatomical parts of letter forms at the point. Y crawl. Counterpoint with floating P's. M phase pattern. W construction. Several years later, I went to grad school at Yale for graphic design to learn how to make my own books and multimedia projects. And I started learning about the rules of typography I was already breaking. These are 2 pages from an oversized letterpress book that combines the song "Willow, Weep for Me," made famous by Billie Holiday, and "Don't Weep for the Lady," a song written about Billie after she died. My graduate thesis, also my first offset printed book, was a score for 8 two-person conversations, inspired by people I'd met the summer before here on Venice Beach. I called it a study of human dialogue and a celebration of the music and poetics of speech. This book began a lifelong obsession and way of writing for voice, on the page, for the stage, through typography, inspired by prismatic characters and everyday discourse. I set each character in a different type family, and the choreography of each dialogue on the page reflects the kind of interaction between the characters. On this page, you have a religious missionary talking around an unsuspecting subject. I don't use punctuation, but break lines significantly, as in verse, indicating pauses of breath or thought. And I only list the name of each character once at the top of the page. Printed on translucent paper, you see and hear approaching and receding conversations. Here's a married couple arguing in French, occasionally coming together in laughter. They continue arguing while these other 2 people flirt with each other on the same wavelength. Here, the dialogue between 2 Chinese speakers moves from right to left on the page as the English speakers move from left to right. I orchestrated multiple conversations at the same time, which built up till you had all 8 pairs talking at once. I was very interested in seeing what that looks like on a page. A few pages later, there's a denouement. Krishna, well, Daru, de, nice funeral. 1983, continues this approach of book as performance score, but with emphasis on interior thought more than conversation, through 7 characters who inhabit the same building over the course of one day. Explores those synaptic gaps and utterances between thoughts and speech that bridge our sometimes imperfect search for meaning, and a desire to connect with others you know. I used a 4-column grid superimposed over a 3-column grid, which allowed me to have as many as 7 voices on a page, thinking and sometimes talking at the same time. In the final movement, one of the characters, an artist named Sasha, rebels against me, the male author of this bizarre construction. She takes the reins and starts orchestrating the other characters, telling them where to move, when to speak. Columns loosen from their vertical rigidity. You can see she has a more lyrical and rhapsodic sensibility. My friend, the poet and journalist Dennis Bernstein, and I were at a McDonald's in downtown Manhattan, and we realized it was living theater in there, and we decided to write a play, which would also be a book, that takes place at an American fast food joint. Almost immediately, I pictured the cover. You enter the book. Well, it depends if you come through the drive-thru or on foot. You find out about Dream Queen burger chain and meet all 7 characters who either frequent or work at this particular Dream Queen. Each character is not only set in their own typeface, but also color. The text is illuminated with icons and images that evoke the fast food tableau and the internal projections of the characters. Carmen, the cashier, sings, "Next, please," as Esther Rothschild walks up to the counter with her walker and says, "Just a cup of tea, please. I figure hot water in a Lipton tea bag. What can they do to it?" "That'll be all for here to go." "For here, thank you." "Oh, can I have an extra, an extra?" She gets cut off. "Next, please, with fries, large, that all? For here to go, and to drink a lemon thickie." Flash, a psychotic supermarket of fast food personalities with a set of common wisdoms for each one, picks a shoestring fry off a table and says, "Every day, French fries and a Coke, large fry, small Coke, small fry, sometimes a large Coke, sometimes just a fry, no Coke." Esther Rothschild comes to Dream Queen because it's affordable. I really like to eat at the Broil and Barb. I collect the coupons. I like a steak and a baked potato. Over here, you get that great big roll. These rolls, I never eat them. And you hate to throw them away. You drop crumbs from the buns and they stick to your blouse. You dress, you go home, they're all over the floor. I got up yesterday and saw an ant. I went crazy, got Lysol, ammonia, sponges, the big brush, and scrubbed holes in the walls. Sure, Broiling Barb's a nice place, but you can't eat nice. You can't eat the niceness of a place. It costs. The conversation about food, money, dreams, and aspirations are seen and read in an environment of repeatable, greasy comfort. Before the play book begins, one of the customers is found dead in a pool of blood and ketchup. Each character bears testimony to a different perspective on how and why she died. In Act 6, one hell of a political argument breaks out against the din of the video arcade in the back. This was 1984, the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And these pages reflect the kinds of intense arguments you could hear. By the way, this book was produced pre-Macintosh or any kind of what you see is what you get computer. All the type was generated by photo typesetting, coding, and a lot of cutting and pasting of words and images onto handmade mechanicals. These are just some of the layers that make up the mechanical of the densest spread, which has 10 overlays and required over 100 exposures onto each of the 3-color plates. Anyway, Dennis and I believe that everyone has at least one book in them. So in the last act, we came up with what those books might look like for all the characters. Throughout the play, Louise Gialanza is researching a book she's working on called The Potato in America, in which, among other things, she foretells spuds that are genetically engineered to repel unwanted pests. The glossary in the back helps define terms for future generations, such as for here or to go, which poses the choice between eating in the confines of the restaurant or carrying food out to be eaten at another location, i.e. car, home. Here's the poster for the first production of the play performed at the Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester, New York, where the book was printed and published. 1988, Grrr, A Study of Social Patterns, is a 464-page animal fantasy fugue based on 8 weavings by Sandra Brownlee with chants and stories by Dennis Bernstein. I scanned Sandra's black and white weavings of unusual animals into what we called at the time a computer paint box, and let her creatures reveal themselves to be the lost, forgotten animals of the earth. The book is a cinematic expression of what I discovered, starting with the first sentient being of the universe, Grrr, a rather dog-like creature. That was a sequence from the first movement, which, like all the movements, conclude with chants and stories. The second movement is about the first underwater creature, Wallazul. Then you meet the first birds, Thieza and Unaliv, who migrate from different landscapes and become singing friends. The first land mammals, a golden nomadic tribe named Roka. Here's a mating sequence that results in a birthing scene. Formation of villages and different hierarchies of society. There's a long list of animal expressions, including ones I made up about the animals in the book. And the last movement is about all the animals together as an ecosystem. Here come the humans with their spears and electric plugs and notions about rebirth and the nitrogen cycle. This was the first book I made with no intention of being performed, but a dancer named Janet Bogardus choreographed a dance piece using images from the book projected onto the dancers. The graphic composition of my work in the 80s and 90s truly reflected the way I experienced the world in my 20s and early 30s, which culminated in a piece I wrote and designed with Phil Zimmerman for Emigre magazine. At around this time, I came to realize that some of my biggest fans, people who collected all my books, hadn't necessarily read them all cover to cover. And as I became more serious as a writer and cared more about the subjects and themes I was portraying, my approach to the visual composition evolved. I had an idea about writing a series of books based on real people who straddle the wobbly line between brilliance and madness. And each book would be proportional to a standing figure with a photograph of the person from the front on the front cover, from the back on the back, and inside the guts. First-person monologues, rants, vignettes, and short stories. The first 4 books in the series formed a quartet of men, which I went around doing readings and performances of. I had so many rich stories, I actually started using a column of text. But I still didn't use traditional punctuation. In Claude's book, I used slashes to indicate breath or thought pauses. Important memories and epiphanies pierce the walls of text. Here, Claude, a survivor of child sexual abuse, battles inner demons and struggles to make sure there is no cycle of abuse. He finds himself homeless and meditates on how it happened. Nicky D from LIC is a sit-down comedian and stoop philosopher who lived all his life in the railroad flat he grew up in with his parents and 4 siblings. His book is illuminated with a lifetime of memorabilia that animates his apartment. Go ahead and print it up. I've got nothing to hide. I told you I'm an open book. My whole life is an open book. What do you want to do? Make a bestseller and make everybody commit suicide? The people on the earth today don't give a damn about the things I got to say, which is what he told me, but then proceeded to pour out his life story, growing up in that apartment and in and out of pediatric wards, loading Liberty ships out to sea during World War II, the great stomach explosion of 1964, and a lot of existential questioning. Like, why is it that some people live to a ripe old age and others die so young? Like that girl who got killed by that bottle falling out the window. Think of the odds against a thing like that happening. The building, the bottle, the girl, the grandmother, the pizza, the ground, the bottle, the grandmother, the pizza, the bottle, the girl, and bing, right square on top of her head. The whole cranium was cracked up bad. Oh, that's a closer view of it. Charlie Lang, a dear friend, amazing musician and brilliant thinker, has also been struggling with bipolar disorder for much of his life, misdiagnosed at 14 years old as having schizophrenia, getting sent to a military academy. On the left, being in the eye of an emotional tornado during his second year at the Berklee School of Music. On the right, getting stuck in a bad cycle in and out of emergency wards, psychiatric centers, and halfway houses. The good news, Charlie has been living independently for many years now, recording his music, making art, and we remain close friends. You can listen to some of his music at soundcloud.com/ChazLang. Brother Blue was known to many people on the streets of Boston as the John Coltrane of storytelling. My book focuses on the stories behind the stories he told, some of which he started telling out in public after the book came out. Incredibly moving stories about growing up black and poor outside of Cleveland, Ohio during the Depression. Heroic stories of his father and mother, of serving in World War II in the segregated U.S. Army, navigating his way in the white-dominated spheres of the ministry and academia, shedding himself of institutional life to become a roaming town crier and raconteur on the streets, in parks, and prisons. After I met and then married the actor and oral historian Judith Sloan, the first book in the Women's Portrait series morphed into a solo show and radio play inspired by the real-life story of Andrea Gibbs, a white deputy sheriff in Mississippi, who, along with 3 black male deputy sheriffs, blew the whistle on brutalities and murders perpetrated by law enforcement officials in youth detention centers and county jails. Their whistleblowing instigated a U.S. Justice Department investigation that resulted in federally mandated reforms to Mississippi prisons. The next documentary project Judith and I worked on together was about new immigrants and refugees who we met in our home borough of Queens, New York, the most ethnically diverse locality in the U.S. Crossing the boulevard, strangers, neighbors, aliens in a new America, is the result of interviewing and getting to know hundreds of people from all over the world a year and a half before 9/11, 2001, and a year and a half after. Our focus was on people who arrived post-1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which forever changed the demographics of this country. Open the book and you're going over the Triborough Bridge toward Queens. You're out on the street crossing the boulevard. You see India's gifted psychic reader on top of Queen Tofa's African weaving and braiding salon. Down the block, the Yogi transmission shop next to Guyana Gold. At 13 lanes wide, crossing Queens Boulevard can be treacherous, but crossing out of war zones, economic hardships, across borders, oceans, cultural and language divides, into the fabric of America is the crossing we were most interested in. We divided the book into 5 movements, beginning with people who came to the U.S. seeking religious freedom, or those who see the United States as a place in need of spiritual healing. You meet each person via their photographic portrait, surrounded by their story, told in their own words, and reproductions of objects and images they've carried with them from home to home. I continue to cast each person in their own typeface and typographic approach, and list their names once on a page, though I do use traditional punctuation in this book and pack a lot of story on a page, including contextual information in red about the relationship of the U.S. to the person's home country and other information. There are maps that overlay the country or countries of origin with the neighborhood in Queens that person or group of people live in. We also show and people describe the code switching they experience on a daily basis, stepping in and out of different worlds and cultural expectations. The second movement features stories of political refugees and asylum seekers, like a group of Loshampas, a Hindu minority in Bhutan, who were ethnically cleansed after the 1985 Citizens Act mandated Buddhism as the official religion of the state, and everyone else was suddenly deemed non-citizens. Yishi was born a Buddhist, but she fell in love with a Loshampa. On the right, a moment in the book when she's describing the time when her mother disowned her for disgracing the family. On the left, my portrait of Yishi from the Crossing the Boulevard exhibit, where I framed the photo I took of her with her marriage certificate, her citizenship card, and a photo of her with her husband and son before they were separated. And at the top, a photo she took of the Himalayan mountain range that overlooks her town. We profile a woman originally from Afghanistan whose own photography chronicles her journey. On this spread, a high school student whose family fled Bosnia describes being a child of war. Many refugees we met fled countries where political persecution, war, even military dictatorships were fueled and supported in part by U.S. foreign policy. Ironically, after life became too dangerous for them back home, they sought refuge and freedom here in the United States. Bovik Antosi is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where he lived for 30 years under the US-backed military dictatorship of Mobutu Sese Seko. He came to the US as cargo and was arrested at JFK Airport and detained at a windowless detention center adjacent to the airport. After 2 years, he was released with the help of the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights. I'm going to thank God every day that I did meet so many friends inside that nightmare detention center from all over the world. When we can't see each other, we email back and forth. I'm going to laugh now every time I feel like crying because there's nothing left I have to lose. I'm going to sing now even though I cannot sing very good because there is no more rule on me that I cannot sing. A guard can't take me to the clinic like I'm a crazy person, say there's something wrong with me singing in the dormitory. I'm going to sing on my bed. I'm going to sing when I'm washing. I'm going to sing walking on the street. If I meet someone new to this country, I'm going to give them hospitality that I did not receive. I'm going to get a job in my field, and by the grace of God, I will clean the water here too. I'm going to discover America outside those cinder block walls. It's not yet discovered to me. I'm going to enjoy the life because I have the human right now to enjoy. I have the right now. The third movement is of family stories, generational gaps and bridges, families separated and reunited, traditions abandoned and rediscovered, and family members in business together. Neighborhood stories movement includes the story of a bull busting loose from a Mexican rodeo who ends up getting shot and killed by police in the parking lot of a public housing project. Neighbors from an area known as Asthma Alley fighting against the construction of another power plant in their neighborhood. There's a story of an Egyptian cafe attacked a few nights after 9/11. The last movement is the great hope of our close-to-home journey, meeting people who come together from many different countries because of something they share in common, like politics, attending an international high school, or playing music together. Here's the beginning of an animation I made based on the Ukrainian-born Eugene Hoots, the leader of the gypsy punk cabaret band Gogol Bordello, telling us his thoughts on globalization.
Globalization is a ridiculous marketing heads concept that helps them to sell things that people don't necessarily understand. feeling of sameness, you know? Like when you drive through America, you're like, okay, well, this is Massachusetts and this is Connecticut. What's the difference? I don't fucking know. Gas station, McDonald, gas station, McDonald. Pretty soon you'll go to Slovenia and see the same shit too. In a mall.
I'm going to stop it there, but you can watch the whole video on YouTube. The soundtrack for Globalization was part of the Crossing the Boulevard audio CD. We also produced public radio documentaries and a traveling exhibit which went to 15 locations around the country and included a mobile photo story booth where visitors could add their own migration stories or the stories of their parents or grandparents. In 2012, Judith was commissioned to write a libretto for a new symphony about the immigrant experience in Queens. Grammy Award-winning composer Frank London composed the music, and I designed expressionistic supertitles. I don't have time to play any of it right now, but you can watch an excerpt reel on my website. In 2016, we mounted a 17-window installation on the ground floor of CUNY Law School across from a busy subway station, based on the anthem at the end of the symphony, which is Judith's reimagining of Emma Lazarus's New Colossus poem that's on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty at the dawn of rewritten for the Trump presidency, which had just happened. I'm very interested in delivering poetry and visual literature in public places. I wrote and designed this poem poster in 2020 for the Hope Wall project of ever-changing posters in Richmond, Virginia. From 2015 to 2019, my community design class at SUNY Purchase worked on a large-scale visual poetry project in vacant storefronts in downtown White Plains, working with their business improvement district and with Judith, who wrote the poems. My students' visualizations of the poems were produced as large-scale vinyl prints, lenticulars, animations, projections, laser cuts. In those 5 years, we transformed dozens of storefronts, hundreds of windows, and eventually some construction barrier walls. The project was credited for helping revitalize the downtown and lowering the vacancy rate from 23% to single digits prior to COVID. Back to books. After working on the portrait series in Crossing the Boulevard, representing all these very real people and their stories, I felt a strong need to work on a project that left more room for invention and getting at the truth through the interior dimensions of characters. My illuminated novel, A Life in Books, The Rise and Fall of Blue Mobley, contains 101 books within it, all written by my fictional author protagonist who finds himself in prison whispering the story of his life in books into a microcassette recorder over the course of one sleepless night. Blue's memoir is paired with a retrospective of all his books, their cover designs, catalog copy, and excerpts that read like short stories. In Chapter 1, Blue recalls his introduction to printing in the letterpress shop of the Joan of Arc Junior High in Queens, New York, where he composes his first books, including The Grandest Art Show in the World, a 3-inch tall, 14-page book about a magical experience he had one day with his artist mother, who also happens to struggle with bipolar disorder. Mother is a famous artist that no one knows about yet. You can see her work in our apartment, but for some reason, nobody except the few people we already know are allowed in. She does most of her artwork at home or around the neighborhood, but from time to time, she goes to the South Shore of New Jersey to draw or just to look around. One time when I was 9 years old, she took me to a New Jersey marshland, not too far from Staten Island. I'll never forget. It was a Sunday, late afternoon, middle of winter. We sat there freezing in my aunt's gold Rambler station wagon that my mother borrowed for the day. There was no heat on in the car, and my mother's window was 3/4 open because we were there to watch the sunset together. Shortly after we got there, my mother looked up at the sky and said, "Today is going to be a good one. I can tell by the atmospheric conditions and the moisture and the wind velocity and all this meteorological terminology that I had no idea my mother knew." She was definitely pumped for the occasion and excited to share it with me, her only son. We're going to have a fantastically colorful sunset today. It's going to be quite a show. Well, that was just about the last thing a 9-year-old kid wants to be doing on a Sunday, sitting in the freezing cold in a dumpy car with his mother watching the sunset. But at the same time, I have to admit, it was kind of amazing. It was like this huge planetarium light show, only there was no technology involved, except for my mother's stopwatch and her sketchbook and watercolors. Actually, she never touched the sketchbook or the watercolors that day, but she did keep looking at the stopwatch. In 3 seconds, the shadows over there are going to change from Prussian blue to a magnesium blue and then to a kind of luminescent mauve. Sure enough, the sun went down a few more degrees. Then she said, these clouds up here are going to turn like a fluorescent orange pink. And she was right. I looked up at her and I noticed her eyes weren't blinking at all. I think so she wouldn't miss even a fraction of a second. And then I saw her body was shaking, and it scared me a little because I knew she wasn't shaking from the cold, but from the beauty of watching the sun go down. And then I was shaking too, not so much from the cold because I didn't feel cold anymore, and not so much from the beauty of the sunset, but from looking up at my mother, almost in shock, wondering how she knew in advance what the sky was going to do before it happened. It was as if my mother, who you might think if you saw her on the street is just an ordinary person, had orchestrated the grandest art show in the world, and I was the audience. I don't have time to get into much of Blue's life and book story, but I will tell you he becomes a war reporter. Then for about a decade, he writes experimental novels like The Switch, about a day on Earth when everyone is switched with their number one enemy. Narcissistic Planet Disorder, about a planet that thought it was the center of the universe. The Book of Lies, inspired by his best friend who turned out to be a pathological liar. He became a little famous for writing a one-sentence, 365-page novel that takes place inside the mind of a man painting a red barn red. His novel Boxland is set in a land where the corporation supersedes all other jurisdictions. A lifelong doodler loses all touch with reality and falls inside one of her doodles. He wrote short story collections like Spitz Sonata, and All My Men Were Musicians and I'm Tone Deaf. There's a manifesto written from the vantage point of a middle-aged pair of pissed-off feet. When Blue's daughter is stricken with a potentially deadly blood disease which requires the best medical care in the world, including treatments his health insurance won't cover, he works on replacing the esoteric writing categories in his mind with more commercially viable ones that correlate to categories that actually exist in bookstores. His first murder mystery, A Damn Good Plot, is followed by One Good Plot Deserves Another, followed by Plotsville. He forays into pet lit, culinary murder mysteries, and a pop-up book on the history of capital punishment. Under the pseudonym Dr. Sky Jacobs, he comes out with A Slacker's Guide to Not Accomplishing Your Full Potential, and other books that help Blue grapple with his own sense of loss, crisis of purpose, and hard-to-figure-out conflicts. Towards the latter part of the novel, Blue fears that books are not nearly as central to people's lives as they once were. So he starts making books with televisions in them, coloring books with pictures of war atrocities, a line of biodegradable toilet paper poems. Wipe, sitting here reading, lost for a moment in eternity. Preemptive strike. War begets democracy like a blowtorch waters the lawn. He comes out with book toys for boys that drive, roll, chug-a-lug, and fly. Book clothes and accessories and a line of illuminated book lamps. We used to sit around the campfire telling stories. Then for a long time, books were the thing. The book, the campfire, both storytelling relics from bygone eras that can light up a table and give you a warm literary feeling. Book lamps with big ideas. that reflect the nature of inspiration. That take us beyond ourselves. That remind us of texts we used to dive into and swim around in. The ultimate coffee table book. All technologies of communication lighting up your living room. A Life in Books has multiple offshoots, including a traveling retrospective exhibit of Blue Mobley's life's work. And I just completed fleshing out one of the 101 books into its my own full-length novel titled Trace, a Surveilled Novel, which I aim to have published in 2025. In 2019, Dennis Bernstein and I came out with another collaborative book, 5 Oceans in a Teaspoon. His poetry, my visualizations. Some of you might know Dennis as the host of the syndicated investigative news program Flashpoints. Comes out of KPFA. But he's also a brilliant poet. I looked through thousands of his short poems written over 45 years, and I ended up selecting 225 of them, structuring a book into 8 movements that reads like a memoir in short visual poems. The book distills the life of a poet-journalist and does so in a small space with minimal means, hence the title 5 Oceans in a Teaspoon. I'll share a few poems from the book. The first movement encompasses growing up poems. Dyslexia. I answer to many names, but the alphabet confuses me. Every day I drown in 26 sounds, and I've never been able to stay between the lines. Pain relief. Mama was the pincushion of compassion we all stuck it to. The sheriff of motherhood. 2 brothers fighting over who got more. They yanked pistols out of the invisible and opened fire. Both dropped to their knees, having mortally wounded each other, leaving the sheriff of motherhood to clean up the mess. The astronomy of linens. My mother spent her Saturdays stitching clouds to a miniature sky, sewing in the dark side of the moon. An amateur astronomer, she reworked all of space on button-down cardigans, cotton bed sheets, and handmade flannel shirts. Her sons rose and set on window curtains and tablecloths from one end of our track house ranch to the other. Disaster relief. Half-licked jumbo sucker laying sideways in the gutter. A gathering army of ants is assessing the scene. Knitting club. Circle of women joining ends at the 5 Corners Cafe, spinning yards. As a longtime frontline reporter, Dennis has covered many wars and their aftermaths. War correspondent. Whose death do I report first? Whose ashes get top of the fold? Where do I bury the missing in action? Medals. She asked the colonel at her boy's funeral if he knew how to pin them on a dead boy's ashes. Social studies. Wars start in memory and leave memories that start wars. Fast-track citizenship. Green card corpse in marine issue body bag, poised to become an American. I'll let you read these 2 poems. The title on the left is Fear of Sleep, and on the right it's Equal Time. Police brutality on steroids. It took an entire squad of cops to put him under cardiac arrest. The last movement is about aging, looking after ailing parents, and loss of loved ones. Urgent care. In the clinic at urgent care, the blood pressure check reveals unusual results. The ER doc can't seem to give them a proper spin. He pauses, tweets for advice, scans the labs again. According to the data, he says, you've been dead since yesterday. Shadowboxing, yes, you can laugh at that one. Shadowboxing. In spite of my shrinking body, my shadow grows to new heights. And the last thing I'll share with you from Five Oceans is one of a dozen animations I made for the project. This one is my treatment of the poem on the right-hand page of this spread, titled Death of a Family. Original music to all the animations by Andrew Griffin. Poet, cultural theorist Adina Karasik really dug Five Oceans in a Teaspoon and asked if I would collaborate on a book with her. I was already a fan of her highly sonic, kabbalistically inflected feminist poetry and proto-ecstatic performance style. So this past October, we came out with Ouvert, Ouvre, Openings, made up of 2 long poems about reopening after a global pandemic. The title poem explores a range of intralingual etymologies as it tracks the trepidations and celebrations of many different kinds of openings. I placed the first few phrases down on a page, and the propulsive words in the opening lines began to grow in size, swell and recede. I saw that the space between the left and right pages of a spread could have metaphoric potential as a barrier that can stop you or be overcome. Adina used a lot of parentheses and brackets in the poem, so they became like walls separating inside, outside, borders. The poem is also very alliterative, so I thought I can alliterate too, visually, by accentuating certain letters like the O's, and sometimes the O's split and multiply like COVID cells. The second poem is about navigating touch in the wake of the virus. So the setting is more tactile and textured. Adina used a lot of slashes in this poem, so the slash came to represent obstacles that words needed to navigate around. Some got bigger and heavier and form a kind of maze. The book comes with a QR code that links to a recording of Adina performing both poems accompanied by Frank London.
Itself be touched, touches its border, touches only on point to limit a surface as a tangent touches a line with a crossing it.
I see these pages like environments that readers roam through and feel with their eyes. Here's the QR code in the back of the book, and here's Adina performing at our launch at the New Yorican Poets Cafe. Rick Black is another poet who sought me out after seeing Five Oceans in a Teaspoon. He sent me the draft of a book about the bottomless pain of losing a loved one, yet figuring out a way to move forward with life. The text came to me with only a few words on a page, and a license from Rick to do my thing, turning it into a book, giving the words room to breathe while breathing another kind of life into them. The death of his mother triggered other traumatic memories from his time as a reporter in the Middle East. Eventually, he finds a means of containing his grief while keeping the memory of lost loved ones. I'm excited about this book and think it will function both as a work of art and as a talisman and resource for people dealing with loss. We're about to start shopping it around for a publisher if you have any ideas. I've got a dummy with me, you can see. Last two projects I'll share with you quickly that are both coming out in a dual book launch this May. First, my anti-war feminist retelling of the biblical tale of Rahab, the Canaanite harlot who lived in a mud hut inside the outer brick wall of Jericho. My text with images by the amazing painter Sharon Horvath. The book will be bound in a bifurcated do-si-do binding, once used to bind Old and New Testaments together. A portion of the proceeds will go to Women Wage Peace, the largest grassroots peace movement in Israel. The other publication being launched in May is an electronic book that I wrote and designed based on the true story of a writer's hard-fought battle to regain language after a devastating stroke. Created for mobile devices and laptops, the interface, made in collaboration with programmer Artemio Morales, toggles between columns of text that you read at your own pace and animated sections that evoke gaps inside a mind challenged by broca aphasia, full of perceptions, thoughts, memories, and desires, but struggling mightily to find words needed to communicate. Ultimately, riveted in the word is a story about overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. And last thing I'll leave you with is one short excerpt that picks up toward the end of a section where the protagonist, thinking about her decades-long rehabilitation, recalls the moment she first began to speak again. Music, Andrew Griffin. Never gave up. Always riveted in the world, in the word. Inside screaming, ah! Wanted to rip a word, any word out of my mouth so bad, so mad. A few more months and one afternoon, chocolate stumbled out, the word. Simon, her husband, shook his head like he was hearing things. He was hearing things. He says, chocolate? I'm nodding frantically, moving eyebrow up, down, bed shaking, so excited. Chocolate. I say it again. The most beautiful sound. Simon runs downstairs, brings up a box of Russell Stouffer samplers. Simon and me both beside ourselves with can't believe, give and take in a marriage, love each other like one, don't know how many years, then a millimeter blood clot, a millisecond, and kaplunk. I forever take and take, Simon all give, until before he die, give and take again. Two patients, we helping each other. Thank you.